Bon dia, Eva Cordia. Hello, everybody. Good evening to you. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another Fireside Chat. This is our 53rd, where I'm in conversation with a member of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. So just type in your name and let me know where you're from. Ciao, Elvira from Italy, and Lisa from Washington, and Gear, I think. Tara, lovely to see you again. Natalie from Aubrey, is that Tennessee? Lovely. And hi, Stefan from Loud. And hello, Ferdiad. Lovely to see you. Yes, today is treating me very kindly. It's mild, though it has been raining. Hi, Zane from California. And Pete and Willow from Wyoming. Lovely. And ciao, Paolo. And Janet from Southern California. Lovely. Lovely to see you all. Hi, Ben from Ontario, and Sherry. So many people from America today. It's amazing. Hi, Sue. There's from Northamptonshire. Lovely to see you. And greetings from Bavaria. Lovely. I don't know what your name is because it's in runes, I think. Lovely. Hi, John. Hi, Gretchen from Virginia. Lovely. Oh, Ardna Murchan. That's John King. Lovely. So let me introduce you to this evening's guest. We go to Donegal in Ireland, and I'd like to introduce you to Seán Ó'Gaoithín. Seán, you're so welcome to this Fireside Chat.
Thank you very much.
Great. So tell us, I know you're in a magical place, but I'd like everybody else to hear where you live and what it's like and the landscape there.
Well, I live right on the top northwestern tip of Ireland, right, very close to the coast, and the area is called Clochanili, and just to the north in the sea, in the ocean, in the Atlantic Ocean, is Tory Island, and then there's great big beaches between me and the sea, and to the south there's a chain of mountains that run from Errigal to Muckish. So there's a sort of a southern skyline of mountain peaks that get covered in snow in the wintertime. And to the west is Crookfola, which is the corner of Ireland where the north coast becomes the west coast. So we're right on that northwestern point. And to the east is Hornhead, another wonderful magical piece of landscape. It's rural, and it's also the setting for some of our earliest mythology as well. So it's mythic landscape. It's quite treeless. It's very exposed. It's very windy here. The skies are very dramatic, but it's very rural at the same time. So from a biodiversity point of view, from a natural point of view, it's very beautiful. It's very unspoilt rural landscape. And I'm somewhere in the middle of it all, quite close to a village called Falcarra, which is the sort of central old market town of the area. And quite close, within a couple of 100 meters of the centre of Falcarra, there's an ancient mound that its old name was Tulloch Lu, so it's associated with Lu, and of course in our mythology Lu was born out on Tory Island, and the chain of mountains to the south. We suspect the tallest of the mountains, Mount Errigal, which is this big conical mountain, it may have borne the name of Lu originally. It may have been associated with the deity Lu. It's now called Errigal, which they believe is a Christianization of an older pagan mountain. That's quite common in the Irish landscape to have layers of mythology in our landscape. So a lot of our mythology is very much rooted in place and in place name and all those things.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And then my own place has a ring fort in the garden as well. So there's there may be, I like to think anyway, that there's an association with the ancient ring fort that I have in my garden with some of the mythology as well. And the townland that I live next to is known as Drumnatinny, the ridge of the fires. And in our mythology, these fires were the fires of Gavada Gawa, the legendary smithy of the Tuatha Danann, and he features in the Balorlu story that features so strongly in this landscape.
Wow.
It's fun.
Now, I know you have a magical garden. So just describe that.
Well, where I live now is an old cottage. It's pre-1820s. So it's in terms of buildings, it's a very old building, even in the neighborhood. There are not many buildings that are more than a couple of 100 years old anyway. And I bought it as a ruin, and I noticed that there was a ring fort on it too, which kind of intrigued me. And really, when it was over the last decade or so, I've turned effectively a piece of grassland into a woodland. So I'm very interested in growing all our native trees and shrubs and herbs. And then I'm particularly, I've had a strong interest in the use of herbs, and I suppose I'm more of a cultural herbalist than a herbalist, if that makes sense. I'm interested in the kind of cultural history of herbs and their ancient Irish names, and how those names can tell us and help us to link back to older understandings. And my herb garden is in the shape of the curled up fetus. So from above, if you could see it from above, it looks like that. And I've planted the herbs corresponding to the different parts of the body. Head herbs would be things like sage and rosemary, and I have big bone herbs such as comfrey in the big bone parts of the body. So it's kind of play on the idea of Miach, Jancocht's son, who when he was buried, all the herbs of Ireland grew up from his grave, corresponding to the parts of the body that they're good for. So I wanted to have a play with that. So it's a sort of a creative thing. And my garden is, it's like a living library. They are the plants, all the different herbs teach me in a way directly, in a way that books can't, I suppose. I have lots of books too, but I think what I learned from doing it was that probably the first libraries were just nature, were just, by touch, by smell, by experimentation, people associated knowledge and wisdom and understanding with the uses of herbs. So I really enjoy all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Someone says, I bet they're out there singing right now, the herbs.
Yeah. I just did a big clearance there recently, just in the last week or two. So all the herbaceous growth is dying back anyway. I've done my harvest, and I decided to just really, you could say, like, kind of graze the ground really low by really bringing everything right back to the soil level. These are all plants that will come back from their roots anyway. But it just opens up the place in a really nice way. Before we really managed the landscape the way we do now, wild animals were the managers of the landscape, and grazing, stuff right quite tight to the ground is a very important part of the natural ecology. You still see that in places like the Alps, where the goats, they'll graze back the alpine meadows quite tight, and that's important because if they're not grazed, the growth becomes very lank and sort of layers on top of itself. So it needs that. So I've just been noticing how I'm seeing an awful lot more birds, especially small birds, as a result of having really cleared the ground. And it kind of occurred to me that I did a bit of research because I was working on the concept of a healing garden for one of the local hospitals. And the psychology of gardens are that humanity feels safe in an environment where it's like open savanna, where the herb layer is actually very short and you have trees. And that's because there's, you can't have any wild animals to jump out of the bushes to eat you, that you feel safer. And it occurred to me that it's probably also true for the small birds and for nature, that because of the more open aspect, I've just cleared one section, like the rest of it's still very full. But this one section now is really being utilized by lots of tiny birds as well as the big birds. And they're sort of pecking through the ground because they have access to it, So that's sort of, I just enjoy all that, the interactions, and I love that there's a very rich ecology now in the garden. Before it was just grass and it had a limitation to its what it could offer wildlife. Now there are woodland butterflies and woodland birds resident in the garden, and it's got a life of its own, which is very important too.
It's lovely to hear that. I mean, my garden was like, it was a lawn mowed by the previous owners to within an inch of its life. And now, well, you've seen it, it's quite developed. Sorry, it's grown. There's no more room for trees. But, it's interesting you're talking about cutting everything down. I'm always reluctant because I think, but I know, okay, I'm going to have to do that just to, raise the land myself because I don't have any animals. It's interesting that opening up and then allowing other small animals to actually feel safe where they are. I hadn't thought of that. I'm always kind of keeping the green and the leaves for as long as possible, and yet lots of things go leggy in my garden, I have to admit.
It's also I kind of knew instinctively it was the right thing to do, and I wasn't sure. I had a young guy, a French fella, staying as a workaway for a week, and he did a lot of the clearing, and he was trying to understand why I was even asking him to do it, and I wasn't even entirely sure myself, other than I knew it was going to be good. And it was only afterwards we both really agreed that letting light and letting air in, there's something really beautiful about that. And I know that anyway. As a gardener, I look after a big garden as my job, and I was very reluctant to take a chainsaw out sometimes in order to do some fairly dramatic stuff with some crowding of trees and things like that. And so it took a lot of courage to arrive at a place where actually it's critical. Light is everything really in lots of ways. So, and it's the play of light. I found myself sitting in here today looking out on my garden, and there was just this ecstatic beauty. We had a very beautiful day today here in Donegal. The sun is really low in the sky at this stage, even at midday. So everything is side lit, and it's beautiful like that. And there's a sort of a watery quality to the sun at this time of year as well. So it's very, very different sense. And of course, as we get closer to midwinter, the sun is getting lower and lower in its angle in the sky. And there's something incredibly direct about the experience of the sun when it's so low in the sky. It's kind of looking you straight in the face rather than being up there somewhere.
Wow, wonderful. So somebody is here from Tyrone, and of course you're in Tyrconnell. Do you want to just talk about the two lands, just a little bit about Tyrconnell agus Tyrone?
Yeah, Tyrconnell is the old name for Donegal, and Tyrone is its natural partner. The two counties are named after two of the sons of Niall of the Nine Hostages, who was the High King of Ireland, who was responsible for bringing St. Patrick to Ireland, is what we have in our tradition. And in our tradition, Night of the Nine Hostages, he had 10 wives and maybe 100 children. So effectively, he was able to nearly produce his own army, and his the lineages from Night of the Nine Hostages are extremely important right into late Irish history, because many of the tribes of Ireland, many of the big families of Ireland were descended from him, like the O'Neills and the O'Donnells. They're two branches of one. So they were the Gaelic lords of Ulster in the 1600s, and they were very significant historic figures. So Niall and Owen, or Connell and Owen, were two of his many sons. There was a sort of a branch of his sons came up into, made a big conquest into the northwestern part of Ireland, and they changed the history and landscape, and many of the name places changed as a result of how there were shifts in tribes and little kingdoms as a result. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Just Blake says, I think our Druid hearts are all a bit hesitant or weep a bit at the loss or removal of individual trees. But as you're stating, Seán, there's often a purpose or a reason, and it's easier to accept that. I think many initially just don't understand. We often need to take a utilitarian approach. The strategic removal of a few trees can help the health of the forest overall.
Yeah.
And I know you advise that in my own garden, because I had a very overgrown garden, and that would be my leave it alone. And it's made a huge difference since just taking out a little bit. And again, that light in the air is really, really important.
Sure. Yeah. So kind of taking time to kind of figure these things out is a good thing. And in that time, you can address the tree spirits. And so there's not a shock, awe kind of factor when the time comes to do the work. I like to take a couple of years over making some of these decisions rather than, being very quick about it.
Yep.
And it also reminds you constantly of the responsibility of getting it right in terms of placing trees, so that I'm already looking at that in my own garden. I was so enthusiastic about planting that I'm going, oh God, here we go. I'm going to, I'm hoping nature will take care of a lot of it. And, we have such strong wind that it'll shape everything anyway. But I will also do a little bit of judicious pruning to help trees form well and stay really steady. So I try to keep the canopy low initially so that the roots get very strong because of the wind. I'd love to have more space to expand the woodland around me out into the landscape. And that's really what I'd love to be doing with myself all the time, is growing more native trees from seed and getting them planted.
Absolutely. And I would love more land to plant trees too. Anyway, but I don't. Poppy says, 'cause she's in Crete, if you don't prune the olive trees, they'll not make olives. And and Blake says he's even held tree funerals. He says it helps us and them in the situation, I believe. Yeah. I suppose it's everything, communicating and being respectful. I remember when Howard would be trimming things, I'd say, and he'd say, look, it's a haircut, it's toenails. It's just making things that little, like you say, strengthening things to improve the plant rather than to damage it. So Blake, again, pruning fruit trees makes them stronger and produces more fruit. So Seán, I know what brought you to, you've been interested in herbs long before you became a Druid. And obviously you're also the head gardener in Glenveigh National Park. Just tell our viewers a little bit about that.
I've had I've spent most of my life living here in Donegal. As a student studying horticulture, I was visiting Donegal and got wind that there was a job vacancy in Glenveigh, and of course, I knew Glenveigh as this magical castle set in the deep in the mountains on the side of a lake, a really enchanted, extraordinary setting with these really gorgeous, charming woodland gardens around the castle. It's kind of like a Camelot, really. It's extraordinarily, really, really beautifully set, beautifully conceived place, and then beautifully planted. Anyway, I sent a letter. Thought, God, that would be nice to get a job there if a vacancy came. And then I got on with my studies and ended up in London, in the botanical garden, the Chelsea Physic Garden, in the middle of London, as a student gardener there. And while I was there, I got this letter out of the blue saying, did I want to apply for the job of the head gardener in Glenveigh? And I couldn't believe that I'd somehow managed to swing that just by writing a letter. Anyway, I did the interview and got offered the job. And I told them that, if they did offer me the job, I wanted to live on site. Yeah, I was sort of pushed it a bit, like, because I wanted the full shebang experience of actually living on site, being the head gardener. And so I did. And for 15 years, I lived in the gardener's cottage at the top of the wall garden and conducted my business. And the garden is organic. There's a fully working wall garden with herbaceous borders. In my time, we've done a lot to bring heritage plants into the garden, Irish apples, unusual Irish cabbage varieties. We have a unique dahlia that was raised first in Glenveigh. We've had it since 1930. I did a count there recently. There are about 2,500 different kinds of plant in the garden, of which about 250 are trees, and about the same are shrubs, and then a huge array of herbs and flowering bulbs. So it's really beautifully planted, and it's set in the garden itself also blends with the native woodlands. So a very considerable part of the charm and beauty of the gardens are the native oak woodlands that merge with the garden. So that's also really right up my street, because I've always had a very strong affinity with the natural flora of Ireland, and my training was in botanic gardens. So for me, I read the landscape through the vegetation. No matter where I am actually in the world, I have a sense of intimacy, you could say, with a place through the vegetation. So I'm kind of nuts about plants. Yeah,
I've seen that, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what brought you to Druidry and the order?
I was thinking about this today when I was walking on the beach. In some ways, I feel like I've always been a druid. As a child, I was very much a child of nature. We loved our own little rituals that we performed as children. We built our little forts, and we had our little tribes and battles and magical staffs, and we made up our own names. We had our own magical names. All of that was part of our childhood. And Halloween, within a couple of 100 meters of where my family lived, my mother still lives in the same house. There was this rock that we were, as children, convinced was inhabited, by the fairies.
Okay.
And it was also this rock, on this rock, that we built our great big bonfire every year, which was a massive logistical operation. Like, we built huge bonfires, and it was a spectacular part of our childhood. And then I went, later I went to art college, and I remember one of the things that we were brought out into the forests by this great tutor, and told to make art in the forest. And I found myself making kinds of ritual space, lighting a fire, the whole business of just being outside, and very, very close to nature, the smell of the soil, the herbs, the mystery of the trees, the presence of the trees, all those things. So I was at that point that I took a bit of a turn in my career path from pursuing art as a career to pursuing gardening and horticulture as a career. And then more recently, as I move out of my middle ages into my kind of elder years, I'm coming up to 60. I kind of set it myself a sort of a goal to be some sort of a druid by the time I'm 60. So I have another couple of years to go yet. So I'm doing quite well, I think. And I remember finding out about you, Eimear, and Kilkenny Druidry as a very at a very early stage of looking about to see what was available. And there were a number of small independent Druid schools here in Ireland, and I checked a good few of them out. Some of my friends are, very much part of those schools. And I just, in the end, found Obod to be the most appealing in terms of what was on offer, really. The courses as they were described and laid out, and the resources that the Obod offer are brilliant as well. So, like, it was in happier times in a sense that I joined Obod when you could go to these wonderful gatherings, and that's a lot of the fun of being part of a Druid order is the gatherings. So I saw there, I have a message from Dav today saying that the summer gathering is on, and that's fantastic. That it's actually looking good. So yeah.
So, because it's interesting, I know when I joined, there was kind of questions: why are you joining an English order? And I'm always curious as to why an Irish person joins Obod. I mean, I did, but I'm just interested. What is it? Can you say specifically what it is, or what was it that called you? What was it about Obod that called you?
Well, I'm a member of the Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland. Okay, and to be honest, I do have a very straightforward answer to your question. And you know what it was? It was an impulse that I felt that I need to really address my sense of connection to our brothers and sisters in Obod or in England. Brexit was kind of raising its ugly head. So I felt like this sort of sense of separation was arising from wherever. And my act of enthusiastically joining Obod was a sort of a counter to that. I needed to do that on a personal level myself to kind of reaffirm my sense of deep connection to our friends in England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. We're all one. We're all one family. We have such a rich heritage that the Obod materials are full of Irish material too. So Obod recognizes that, and so just that we need to stay close and continue to work together.
It's really interesting you say that, because I mean, I was brought up, learning about the 800 years of English oppression on the Irish and all of that stuff. And, as a child, being anti-English. And I remember going over to England and being called one of the dirty Irish.
Yeah.
and the shame and the embarrassment of being that unconscious of my accent. And I remember the first gathering I went to in 2011, I was really conscious of my accent, coming down on the bus from from Bristol down to Glastonbury, and I wondered how I would be accepted, because I was very, very strong. Because okay, we'd had the Good Friday Agreement, but there was still, you know, a huge legacy from the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and so many of my friends, when they'd be going over on the boat, would be taken in for questioning because of their accent. So, and I was blown away by the welcome I had, and I've had. And, you know, how Obod is like another family for me, and how the landscape, even within the Britain, is very much a homecoming. So for me, it healed that wound between the two countries. And I think Brexit is a very sad thing. Forgive if there's any Brexiteers watching this, but for me, that, you know, when we go back far enough, you know, there was so much traffic between these two islands that wasn't always battling. It wasn't always about conquest. You know, Druids went back and forth, shared teachings. You know, the story of Fidelma, the Druid that Maeve meets on her way to fight Ulster, and she said, "Where have you been?" And she said, "I've been studying seership in Alba in Scotland." So that, and then it's interesting in some of the stories, obviously not the Bran and Branwen story. That's not a very nice story, because Branwen marries an Irish king and she's abused. But still, within the Welsh stories, connection with Ireland. So for me, it was really, really important to have that. So it's interesting that was your
an impulse. Yeah. So and much of that, I feel like that's unfulfilled, is because really we've been stopped attending and meeting, you know, big gatherings, all those things. So we really miss out on that kind of stuff.
Well, hopefully we will come through that again. And I suppose our thing is, well, even this forum and then our online ceremonies, we're going to have an online gathering for December as well, a winter gathering. What that does is it broadens it out to people who've never been to Glastonbury, who are not on these islands, who can't easily travel. So like I said earlier, there are so many people on tonight now from the US, and I'm blown away by that. And it's daytime there, so, and it's a Thursday, so it's a working day. But and how important that is, reaching out to, and we often have people, quite often have people from the Southern Hemisphere, even though it's the other side of the day, because it's important to have that connection. So and I suppose with Druidry and within the orders, again, is that diversity and that welcoming all kinds of people into a space that people can be within their individual expressions, I think is really, really important.
Absolutely. And Obod is about accepting diversity, and it's very inclusive. They're very, very important things. Yeah. I can recognize that in your leadership, Eimear.
Thank you.
No, they're very important. Yeah.
So it's and this is one way the pandemic has helped that, because it was very easy to kind of stay insular, as in these are the two islands. And yes, although I would have been traveling, although I was in Germany now the weekend before last doing a workshop there with Obod, and that was just lovely and really strange to be traveling after so long, being held. But it was just wonderful to be able to be in circle with other Druids and really connecting in a very, very deep way, and in a sacred way, in sacred space. And where it's, you know, this is important what we're doing here, but to be able to connect physically is also very important if we can do it. So it's around doing what you can. Now you mentioned you're an artist, you're a writer. Where do you get your Awen or Imas to do your creative work?
These days it's on the beach, but it could be. My sense of connection to nature is what sustains me. I have the good fortune of being surrounded by absolutely gorgeous places to go and receive that wild, revitalizing energy. I always come back completely filled with inspiration from my walks or from my visits to waterfalls or to woods. They're, in a sense, it's also where I'm moving into a place in my own life of finding a voice and finding a way to articulate what's important to me. So like, can you see that? That's my latest little offering, the Ancient Woodlands of Glenveigh. So that was something that I had the good fortune of producing just recently in the last month or two, and it was like my COVID project. And I put everything of years of research into everything that I learned about the folklore, the history, the land lore, the local lore, about the woodlands in the Glenveigh National Park where I work, and produce this as an educational guide. And the feedback that I'm getting is just great. People are absolutely hungry for understanding and a deeper sense of what our woodlands are and why they're significant. And a lot of the information that I've packed the book with is ecological information, or there's a section on a fairy wood that exists and a fairy tree that exists in Glenveigh. So there are many different aspects to the woods and many different approaches, and there are over 20 different types of woodland or kinds of woodland in Glenveigh, and they all have a different feel. So it was a lot of fun going to visit these places. And of course, some of the really wild ones that nobody ever goes to are the ones that have particularly powerful type of what I would call kind of druidic, some very ancient feel. There's nothing like these places. The west coast of Britain, particularly Scotland, has a lot of very similar kinds of mossy, lichen-clad trees, ancient, gnarled trees that have been in the landscape for a long, long time. And for me, biodiversity is my gateway into the magical realms. So in my experience of biodiversity, opens up an experience of being in these magical enchanted places. So enchantment is biological for me. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love that. Enchantment is biological. Michelle asks, is your book available on Amazon?
No, I'm afraid the only way you can get it is requested from Glenveigh National Park. I don't know if they're posting it out to people for free, but we're giving it out. So like, in a sense, it's like a local production. What I might be able to do is send somebody a PDF. That's possible. So that's just an email. So if anybody wants to send you, or you can forward it on to me or whatever, or some way to get an email.
You can do after this is we go back into and look at the comments, that you can actually go into Facebook. But actually, can I put in your email address? Is that what I should do?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just do that now, and that goes on all channels. So
yeah, no problem.
That's not your only book.
No.
The interesting, the one that the first that I came across was the one about Lou.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have my own agenda with that Lou story. But do you want to talk a little bit about your book?
Yeah, I'm just going to. Where is I don't even know where it is. I have one copy left myself. It's available online. I do believe from Amazon still. Lu Nabua, Lughnabua is the title of it, and so it is, I think, available from Amazon. So I bought this little cottage, and I moved out of Glenveigh and down to the coast, and it was like I moved into this mythical landscape, and I found myself occupying this mythical landscape, and of course was intrigued by the folklore of the area. And then, even if you pick up a copy of Lady Gregory's Celtic mythology, which is one of the best of the translated Celtic mythologies, a very good account. Within a couple of pages, you're reading about Balor and Lu and Drumnatini, this townland that I'm right beside. So I was like, God, this is... so anyway, I thought I would do a retelling of the story. That's all I did, and I gave it my own little twist. I didn't really change the run of the actual story. I stuck more or less faithfully to Lady Gregory's version. It's the classic version that was first recounted by a man on Tory Island in the 1830s. So it was collected as folklore, and there was a merging of what we call folklore with what was written down by the monks, in the older texts in the 9th, 10th, 11th centuries. And we have, when you go out to Tory Island, there are all these places associated with Balor, Dún Balor, his castle and his prison, and there's other places here on the mainland that are all associated with the drama that took place in the myth. So I thought, God, this would be a bit of fun, and I got a couple of friends to work with me. An artist called Seán Fitzgerald. He's a brilliant Celtic artist. He did the illustrations, and a friend of mine who's a Gaelic writer, Cathal O'Sharkey. He did a Gaelic language version. So the book has an English language version from me, an Irish language version from Cathal, and it's illustrated by another Seán called Seán Fitzgerald. So it was just a lovely project. And again, like this Ancient Woodlands book, a lot of it got a local distribution. So copies of both of these books go into all the libraries and all the schools in the county. So that kind of means more to me in some ways than they're not really commercial projects as such. It's more about just keeping these ideas, the kind of different parts of our cultural and natural heritage, keeping them high in people's consciousness, because they're really important. So how we understand our very ancient history. The Balor Lu story is part of the mythological cycle, which is the oldest part of our mythology. So you could say that it's like these are our origin myths, and many of the royal lineages of Ireland would claim descendants from Lu, who was one of the very early high kings of Ireland. So there's those kind of genealogies link back to mythology. So it's about identity and a deep sense of connectedness to the land and the landscape. And this particular area of Donegal in ancient times was known as Cheer Lu, the country of Lu. Yeah. And of course, County Louth in the east, on the eastern side of Ireland, it also is named for Lu. So the gods and many of our mythological figures are represented in the landscape itself, which is one of the great things about our Celtic culture. I love all that.
And my attachment to that story is about Biro, the little Druid woman, who gets 2 mentions in the regular story, but actually she plays a key role in the whole story, in that she ensured Lu's conception and she saved his life so that he could go on to fulfill the prophecy that Balor would be killed by his grandchild, and in order to save Ireland. So Oh, and Gretchen says, I only now put together that I read Lou Nabua this past summer as part of my work with Lou before Lunasa and learning Gaeilge. It is beautifully done. Thank you for your work.
Thank you. That's very nice to hear. Good.
Isn't it? Lovely. Brilliant. So, when you think of you're not from Donegal, you're a Dub. And how do you honor ancestors when we're coming up to Samhain now, and Ihahauna is on Sunday, and then we'll be celebrating our own online Samhain will be on the 6th of November, and my own one will be on the 7th. So when looking at ancestors, how do you engage with them, and which ancestors do you engage with? Or do you have a notion or a picture of that?
Yeah. I maintain an altar in my house. It's there just behind me. That's how I regularly engage with my ancestors, and it includes all kinds of deities, gods, horned gods, goddesses, saints, and it also has my family and friends, and it also has a particular quality of where my grief sits, where my altar is also a place of where I can safely put my grief and where I can visit it. So in a kind of a broader sense, when I step outside, my sense of connection to the ancestors again is very much through nature and through biodiversity, and the wilder and more untouched a place is, somehow the more populated it can be with elemental beings, saints, druids, demigods, gods. Mountains are abodes of the gods. It feels like that in this place, and I approach these mountains with a degree of trepidation and awe and reverence that I have an opportunity to connect on a deeper level, and I never know what's going to happen. I don't go with expectations to fulfill expectations. It's a mystery a lot of the time. I step into the mystery of the landscape and space, and so like I would believe that everything is connected to everything. Everything is connected. Today I was just as I was walking down to the beach, I was passing little family groups, and I was passing different individuals, and I was thinking how holy the family is, and how holy childhood is, and how holy parenthood is, and how holy fathers are and mothers are and grandparents are, and in all of that, there's lots of grief and loss going on all around us. It's going on all the time. It's part of the cycle of life. But to be able to be engaged in a just a more open way with all those things is very important. I at times struggle with having a sense of connection with the older gods, the really ancient ones, like Lu, because they're so far deeply buried in our culture. There's lots of layers of you kind of have to clear away a lot of stuff sometimes to get to a sense of true connection. So the Buddha is my spiritual ancestor as much as Jesus is, as much as the ancient Druids in Ireland, where there's Lu in particular represents a type of sacred masculine I'm very interested in. So I'm very interested in having a deeper sense of a grasp of what the sacred masculine is, as much as I want to have a deeper sense of what the sacred feminine is. So I work with those archetypes a lot. Like I would see it in terms of archetypes and energies, and it's a I don't have very fixed views about a lot of it. I'm very open to a broader understanding, so I don't stick to certain gods or certain, although if you saw my place, I have a lot of representations of Lu about the place, as well as others.
You've painted him.
Yeah, so I have a little temple built in my garden that's dedicated to Bridget and Lu, and they are the kind of core deities, archetypes that I choose to work with on an ongoing basis.
Lovely.
So
there's two questions. One from Hannah. Do you find leaving a place for your grief helpful?
Do you find
leaving a place for your grief helpful?
Oh, absolutely. I'd recommend everybody build a grief altar. I think we need them. I think maybe in lots of ways that's what the ancients were doing when they built their temples, that they were center places for where they really dealt with their the business of ancestors and people, life passing on, and death and disease, and how that fits into a bigger context. So yeah, it took me a long time to understand that an altar is a place of grief, not just a place of light. But like, I go to my altar to seek protection for people who need it, or blessing for people who've passed on. It's where I go.
It's beautiful. And I suppose by acknowledging grief, we're acknowledging life and death, and then what comes from that is very, very important. Sive, who's in Tyrone, says, wasn't your ancestral clan name associated with those that commanded the wind? Perhaps I've recalled that incorrectly.
Well, my iron, yeah.
Seán of the Little Wind. Sorry.
Yeah, Seán, Old Man of the Little Wind would be the sort of more direct translation. So Seán is kind of old, really, or old man. Yeah. So I definitely feel like a wind spirit. I do. And my astrology is all fire. I'm fire in sun, moon, and ascendant. So I have a lot of Sagittarian energy going on. But the wind and the air and the howling gales of Donegal are definitely at the sort of West Coast. That whole feeling of the West Coast is something that I just absolutely embrace. I think nothing nicer than getting out into a storm and just absolutely getting into it. I love it.
And you certainly have lots of opportunity, because where you live is very, very wild.
Yeah.
And beautiful and magical.
Yeah.
What would you say has been your greatest achievement, or something, what are you most proud of in your life?
God,
I'm sure you have a long list, so you might have to choose.
I suppose in my career, putting a smile on people's faces is a really nice thing, so when you see how people's faces light up when they come into a beautiful garden space, I suppose that would be, from a Druid point of view, I'm very interested in ritual space. I can think of nothing nicer than getting out there and spending time preparing a space for a ritual, setting it up. I love all that. I love that. I have a very strong feeling for that kind of stuff. But like on a day-to-day basis, on an ongoing basis, looking after a beautiful flower garden that brings such inspiration to people, because people really need to be lifted and almost know that beautiful places exist in the world that they can hold in their hearts or go and visit at times. It's a kind of type of nirvana or heaven, that people need a manifestation of. People who live in busy lives or in cities or urban settings that just don't have direct access to magical places like Glenveigh. So that's very important. I'm very lucky to have that role. And my home has always been a place of openness and full of people and parties, and in more recent times, ceremonies. And they're hugely rewarding, in that people derive real meaning from those things, real meaning in terms of feeling a sense of deep community and sense of deeper sense of marking the turning of the cycle of the year and all those things. So that's that feeds my soul, to see people feeling more connected and part of something. And I like that the rituals are very inclusive, and everybody participates,
Lovely. What would you say has been, it's just something Fran, I think that's Fran Brady, that I was once a student of mine, very enjoyable conversation. We've set up a memory grief shrine altar, and we spend some time at it each day. Very, very nice.
Nice.
I think it's very, very important. And Karen says, it's this time of year helps me pause to revisit my grief and think of my lost loved ones and generations before me. And Hannah says, I still haven't grieved my parents' deaths, so I think a space for me to acknowledge is a good idea.
Yeah.
Because I think having that is a very gentle way of doing it.
Yeah.
Because you're creating the space. It's not being done to you or on you or at you, that you actually create that in whatever way you want to express that grief can be your friend, not just your enemy, or something to be avoided. So I think that's lovely.
I'll tell you about a little experience that I had recently, where it was with my family, and we were I convinced my mother that it would be a good idea for us to have our own kind of family gathering, and that I would do the ritual. And so we did, and I set up a little altar to my brother with candles and flowers and all the rest of it. And then everybody gathered, and I did a ritual circle where I created a sense of space and safety. And there was a lot of tears and sadness, but like I kicked off, talked about my own sense of loss of my brother, and then everybody else had a chance to talk, and everybody contributed, and there was lots of tears, but the kind of the volume of love that was released in the room was extraordinary. So it's extraordinary to be in a situation where you can be heard, where you can listen and be witnessed in your grief in a way that's sort of safe. That's extraordinarily healing, actually. So I was very, very happy that worked out as well as it did, and I recognize that. I suppose, in a sense, we have to be able to own our own grief more and be given an opportunity to really sit with it. And it's really okay. I think we have this idea that we need to hide our grief and we need to do it by ourselves. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah, and I think there's the beauty of having it acknowledged within a family, and sometimes it's harder within a family, that it's easier to do it with strangers. So it's lovely to be able to do it within a family, given all the dynamics that happen in family.
Yeah,
I think that is absolutely beautiful. So it's lovely that you could do that, and that your family members can acknowledge you as a druid to be able to hold the space to do that.
And I think my work with Obod has kind of equipped me with a confidence to get on with that stuff. That's really important to say. Yeah.
Alinea says, this place to listen reminds me of last week's chat. It seems people are needing a space to grieve, be listened to, and be accepted. I don't know if my last week's guest was Harriet Sams, and she, with the Order, is setting up a climate listening circle for members of the Order to share their feelings around the current climate emergency. It's not about proselytizing, educating. It's not about that. It's about having a listening space for people to actually share their grief and their struggles. Because the thing about listening and all of this is it's not about changing anything or changing you, the bereaved. It's about just hearing you speak. No one has to do anything other than listen and give you all that attention. And that is so, so important.
Getting heard.
Just getting heard. No words of advice, not what you should be doing.
And it can be also very healing to recognize that everybody has their own version of grief and their own, and to be able to, so compassion arises for others through listening, and being heard maybe for the self. So it's it's compassion and love. How I had a similar experience with an occasion here locally where we did an ancestral healing ritual with quite a big circle of people, and it was in the same way that it was just actually holding space, allowing people to get heard, and maybe in a sense release a type of emotion and grief that has been sort of really held within for a long time. So it's release too, and through release a space is created for maybe light to return to a situation, or light to fill out a place again. So it needs moving too, and and there is so much grief on so many levels, ancestral, but also this new dynamic of grief for the planet, grief for our entire life support system is threatened. And we're in the middle of it.
Absolutely. Gabriela says, personally, after 30 years of grieving, I found it helped to heal my heart, as the grief was intensifying with time rather than getting easier. So I had to forgive and heal. And then she says, I'm aware it couldn't have been done earlier, but the heart can be healed. And I think that's very, very important, because we all have our own different time frame with which to grieve. And then there's, people might have been saying, Seán, you need to let go, you need to do this, and you're still going around in your grief. And then the right time comes and suddenly you come through. There's some kind of breakthrough, either a letting go, an acceptance, a healing. But that happens at its own time, not anybody else's. Nor can you rush it. It happens when it happens in its own time. So it's around that gentleness, that compassion for self and others.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So what would you say has been your biggest challenge that you've overcome? Out with it now.
I want to say this. It's the challenge to be honest, to be really honest, to be really say it really as it is, and to some extent that requires a lot of learning, to be able to articulate stuff. I'm pretty articulate, but to be able to articulate in a way that so that does get to the root of one of my the things that perhaps one of the things that hurts me most is not getting heard. That goes very deep for me. So when I'm not getting heard, I get very upset, and which is fair enough. so to get heard is the most sort of satisfying of overcomings of challenge, really, to be heard well. And that also, I've learnt in time, requires measure, where, you know, not to say it, not to try and blurt it all out, but to kind of get the essence of what you want to say out sometimes. Or sometimes the most powerful way of getting heard is just a little suggestion. You know, so there's an art to being heard and getting heard. And of course, there's an even greater art to listening, and how to listen well. So they're big ones for me, I'd say. Yeah.
Okay. What's been the most reckless thing you've done?
The most reckless, irresponsible, illegal.
That can cover anything. It doesn't, you know, what's reckless for one person mightn't be reckless for you. But, you know, I've done reckless things that were the right thing to do, but somebody else would have said, no, that's not sensible. So it's not about necessarily illegality or anything like that.
Sure. I don't know. It might have been something like saying yes. You know, I suppose for me, reckless would be like going against your instinct, or is it? Or is it going with your instinct when everything else is telling you the opposite? So
it's taking a risk.
Yeah. Oh, I definitely have to say that it would be exposing some kind of vulnerability, you know, that in a situation where I had no sense of how I was getting heard. To be vulnerable in a very open way would be a very risky thing, and I do it and have done it, and would invite it nearly in some circumstances, but allowing myself to be vulnerable would be a reckless behavior for me.
Is it something that you regret doing, or is it something that you would say an important thing to do?
Well, I definitely would regret it if I misrepresented myself some way. Yeah. You know, and that can happen, you know.
Yeah.
So just that, yeah. Reckless would be taking a chance. It feels reckless these days to say hello to strangers, you know. A bit. It does. You know, people are kind of like passing each other. Now, that's one of the things that I really love about living here is there's a very strong culture of everybody acknowledging each other. So if you're driving, everybody waves as they pass each other, you know. Imagine. And if you're walking, you would say hello and maybe even stop and talk to people. Yep. Like the sense of spontaneity. And at the same time, yeah, it just always, because of COVID, everybody's become a little bit more shielded and guarded and, you know, keeping a little bit more of a distance and all those things. So it's a bit harder to, you know, so really reckless would be giving somebody a hug these days, you know? That's terrible.
Isn't it? That's one of the sad things, is that this pandemic has brought around a certain reserve that and a fear that before, people who were spontaneously affectionate now kind of hold back. I'm hoping we get over that, that there's less risk involved in that. I mean, I have hugged friends, people that I meet, and it's a risk, but it's like, it feels like it's not a reckless risk. You have a sense of a risk that you take. You go, okay, this to other people might think it's crazy, but it feels right for me. And when I've taken those kind of risks, they've worked out. Because to be able to have physical contact with somebody and to hug, I think is so, so important.
Yeah.
And I remember the first hug I had, after having not hugged anyone for so, so long. It's like, oh my God, I've missed this.
Yeah.
So because physical affection is very, Gretchen says the benefit outweighs the risk. I suppose everybody takes that risk for themselves and has to calculate it. Depends on how vulnerable you are physically and all of that.
Yeah.
But touch is really, really important.
Yeah.
Gabriella says, as a sensitive introvert, I appreciate that new reserve that extroverts manifest. Okay, point taken, Gabriella. But you still do hugs. Yeah. I mean, I'm an introvert, even though I am gregarious, but I need a lot of time on my own and to withdraw. So I understand. That's why I loved originally the first lockdown was just brilliant. I just basked in the solitude. And then I'd had enough, but so it's nice now to be able to go out and connect. Have you any regrets in your life?
The only thing that I'm going to admit to would be that I didn't go to see Bob Marley when he played in Dublin in 1981 or whatever it was. It was actually his last concert ever in his world tour before he got sick. So, and I was 15 at the time, and I could have gone, but I ended up going to the Gaeltacht in the west of Ireland instead to learn Irish. So that's something that I really feel like I missed out on. But the kind of decision got made for me. Other than that, no, don't have any big regrets. I don't like to have, I like to make amends and not be on the wrong side of people and all those things and not have fallings out that are kind of in any way lasting or anything like that. So I want to be kind of clean of regrets. That would be important to me, really, Yeah.
I think so. Very, very important. And that's why we do our work, is around, that when we come to the end, that we don't have all those regrets, that we worked through them. It's interesting you talk about Bob Marley being your one. I have a friend who had a ticket for that concert, and she'd been working very late the night before, or had been working, and went to sleep for an hour just to get a rest.
Right.
And didn't wake up until the next morning. So she'd missed the whole thing.
Yeah.
So, that's one of these sad things.
That's good to know.
You weren't the only one.
Yeah.
What are you grateful for?
Good karma. Yeah. A lot of stuff, really. I feel like I've had a very rich and rewarding existence and have had very little to concern myself, and no ill health, no major misfortunes. Really, I feel very, very grateful to be alive now in this time. Even like I feel it's a great blessing. I feel life is full of magic. I have a glass half full kind of attitude to things anyway. I tend to dwell on the positive. I can recognize and see the dark side and dwell in it, and sometimes myself, but it never lasts that long for me. I always end up popping out of it, or hitting rock bottom and bouncing back quite quickly. So I'm very grateful for it's if I'm allowed to say it, I'm very happy to be Irish, and I'm very happy to be in this culture. I feel very proud of the kind of identity that Ireland has. and I like to so all those things. So I would be full of gratitude for a rich and very strong sense of connection to community and landscape and culture. And I've also had a great opportunity to travel all over the world. I've been in many, many countries, and so I've had a very, very colorful life as a gardener, both professionally and personally. I've been very lucky.
And what is it that gives you joy?
In a word, light, probably at the moment, just light. The sun, the extraordinary qualities of the sun. What was the question again?
What brings you joy?
What brings me joy? All the obvious things: nature and friends, and sharing meals, and being creative. I still am very creative. I still draw and paint and write poems, and I love the creative. My house is like a kind of a temple. There's altars everywhere. But also the kind of art and music that I listen to. All those things are. I've surrounded myself in beauty. So, beautiful, nicely made things give me a lot of joy. And making them too gives me joy. And sharing them gives me joy. And my bees give me joy. And sharing my honey, the honey from my bees gives me joy.
Did you have a good harvest this year?
Yeah, another really great harvest. Yeah, again. And I'm doing this kind of free range beekeeping that I'm not putting any chemicals on them at all, and doing a very natural form of beekeeping. And I'm keep letting them have a lot of their own honey. I'm not giving them any sugar or anything like that. And I've gotten an awful lot of honey, like gallons and gallons of honey off them. And they were flying again today. It's so mild at the moment. So they're still working. They're still gathering honey, still creating winter stores. So there may even be more honey out there that I could take off without depriving them, because there's literally so much honey there.
I took a little bit this year from my hive. One hive is wild, and I never touch it. That's just to make swarms for the world.
Yeah.
And I took a little bit, and I'm just so grateful to have it. So I'm hoping that some mead will be made for me from that.
Great.
So so I never have a lot of. Somebody says, what chemicals are used in beekeeping?
Well, there's all sorts of things. There's various pests that bees get, like varroa mite, and there's other things. And there's various chemical preparations that are put on bees to, there's little strips that you drop into the beehive that kill off certain pests, but they also can be quite disruptive and damaging to the bees. Same with varroa. Pure white sugar is a kind of chemical too. It's not nice stuff. There's nothing nice about white sugar, and that's what all beekeepers give their bees. And that's a lot of the reason why bees are not as healthy as they could be, because we're taking all their honey and we're giving them horrible white sugar to live on. And as a result, it's like eating a really bad diet. It's like living on sugar ourselves. We'd all be much sicker if we just ate sugar all the time. So insects are not that different in that respect. So it's obviously a far healthier option to let them have their own pure nectar that they've collected from nature themselves, and it's full of all kinds of natural healing properties, herb oils, pollen, propolis. All these things that the bees produce are incredibly important to their health and the well-being of the hive. And it's only really in the last 100 years that there's all these problems with bees, and it's because of industrial beekeeping and industrial levels of everything, and also all the chemicals that people use in the landscape. They're being brought back to the hive. There's none of that around here because it's mostly a pastoral, grassy landscape around here. So there's no, sprays going on crops or anything like that. So it's a safer place for bees.
You're very lucky. I mean, I think where I am is like a little oasis. I have 2 intense farms.
Right.
Because I leave them alone and I don't interfere with them. I've healthier bees so I've got a top bar hive.
Yeah.
And I only looked at it once, and that was to ask if I could have some honey, and they said yes. And I didn't even smoke my bees. I couldn't find my smoker. No angry bees, no nothing. So lovely. I knew I sang to them, and I took some honey. And it's just such a gift to be. So I describe myself. I can't remember what you said as a beekeeper. I host bees rather than keep them. You said something. You have a wild way of.
Well, free range is,
free range. Yeah. So, because I know when I've lost bees over winters, people lose bees and you don't know why. And then when a swarm arrives and what it changes in the garden. And it's when you hear a swarm come, then you know something has woken up that you didn't realize there was something asleep or dead in the garden. And then when you hear them come, and then the whole energy shifts in the garden, and it's pure magic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, if somebody had told me that, I would have well, I don't get that. I had to experience it. You don't hear the deadness or the silence until you hear the bees, and then you realize, oh my God, that wasn't alive. Now it is. The life has come in. Pure magic.
Yeah.
So it's just what they do to a garden and the magic they bring is like. So Alicia says, I say I'm a bee tender, not a beekeeper. There's so much beauty and magic in the practice. Absolutely. Yeah. It's beautiful. I'm so happy my town, this is Gretchen, is a bee city. We have a pollinator festival every year, and it's amazing.
Wow.
So look forward to a time when I can home some hives. Yeah.
Yeah,
so
lovely.
I'd have more hives if I had more space, but unfortunately I don't.
Right.
So when you think about the modern world, what concerns do you have?
Oh God. There's too many of us. And I like and I hope I'm wrong. I wonder how many of us have awakened. I'm filled with compassion. I believe in human goodness and in the goodness of people. Mm-hmm. I get very frustrated with the pace of change when it comes to policy development with governments and us moving in the kind of direction we need to be moving in to make this planet more sustainable and make we have every capability to turn the earth into the Garden of Eden. We really do. There's no question about that. And it's quite, it's a bit depressing really to see how the headlines are always dominated by some crisis somewhere, some war, some natural disaster, some political upheaval, all these things. It's like the media just goes from one story to the other, and really what's going on in the world is people are living their lives and doing their best in nearly every circumstances, and that's all really people want. So there's an awful lot of agendas, some of the bigger agendas, the military agendas, the geopolitical agendas. That's very hard to look at sometimes because it just has no relevance, or dictators or particular flavors of political outlook or whatever it is. Very little real relevance to the challenges that we face as one family, as one globe, as one. So I'm a great believer in all the ways that we collaborate through the United Nations, through all kinds of partnerships and unions of one kind or another to work together. And there's always going to be mistakes made along the way, but I would want to be optimistic. I think it's important as Druids that we find ways to provide certainty for people. I really do, So I can be full of doubt and full of my own self-doubt or despair in the way things are, how things are moving at a very slow pace or whatever. But I'm constantly searching for certainty, for not unrealistic certainty, but the kinds of things that ground us and connect us to life's processes and make us more resilient and make us more sustainable, those things. Mm-hmm. So we have all the knowledge and all the know-how. We're just slow to, I think, we'll have to see an accelerated level of government support for changing things. It's being promised to us constantly at the moment. That's what's being promised to us, but we're waiting to see it all rolling out. Where they found the trillions to be able to pay for COVID in Europe, why can't they find the same trillions to transform our society, make everybody energy efficient, move away from all the wasteful ways that we send carbon up into the atmosphere and all the waste that's going on in society, and we're moving towards it. And we have very strong capacity. We're incredibly resilient. Humanity is incredibly resilient, and so is nature incredibly resilient. So, hopefully we'll get it right in time to really make it happen. In our lifetimes, in fact.
Let's hope so. Poppy says there are not too many of us. It's just that we forgot our true essence. Have you anything to say to that?
I'm sure you're right, Poppy. In that we're it's impossible to know the big picture. We're all tiny little drops in a river of life and all those things. So I accept that with humility, that we are tiny little drops in a river of life.
Aqua says, nature heals itself. Truth weaves us all. Like nature, we reflect all things in some way. I suppose if you want to heal the world, we need to heal each other and nature, my take. That's what Aqua is saying.
Yeah.
And then Jamie says, yes, there's a good reason to be alarmed, but even more to just tuck in and do what we can. We certainly do have the knowledge. We need action. Okay. So it's a really interesting one. And Blake says that's why activism towards regulation and legislation are important. I'm ambivalent about regulation because I can understand the importance to regulate some things, but when everything gets regulated, then it doesn't allow for any diversity. So, and there's always that tension between allowing freedom to develop and grow and at the same time manage it. There's always that tension.
Sure. But I feel we live in I can't really speak for anywhere else other than this part of the world, and I feel like we live in an incredible period of extraordinary privilege. The people of Ireland have never been so well off, so well housed, so well fed, so well educated, and so free in their choices. never. So we're in an incredibly fortunate situation. I think a lot of the developed world could be in the same category. So, how do we extend that out to everybody?
Absolutely. You're right. We're living in a good time. For most of us, there are still some people who suffer in Ireland, but yes. Stefan Makaba, now he's from Louth, Conde an Lou. I think you are, aren't you? Breaking Boundaries is an excellent watch on Netflix. I don't know. I haven't seen it, so maybe that might be interesting. I assume it pertains to what we're saying. Yeah. Okay, so Jamie says the Earth began with a methane atmosphere and eventually will return to that. Unfortunately, for most life on Earth, let's delay that as much as possible. So, yeah, and I suppose it's about living as fully as we can for as long as we can, but fully engaged with our environment, with that connection all around us, rather than that attitude of eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die.
Yeah.
It's just how can we live as fully as we can with each other and engage with our landscape. Recognize but that we are the landscape. We are a part of the landscape, not that we are outside nature that we must mind, but that we are we are nature. We belong there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to believe there's anything wrong with the world in this part of the world. As far like looking around you here, it's really hard to believe that there's any problems on the planet. It's so peaceful. There's no crime. There are social issues and all the rest of it, but relatively speaking, this is an incredibly blessed part of the world, incredibly politically stable, actually. All those things, relative to the human experience, it's close to nirvana. It's close to Tir na Nog in some ways. And one of my favorite spiritual teachers is Thich Nhat Hanh, and he talks about the kingdom of God or paradise being in the present moment. That our access to paradise is available to us all in how we find peace within ourselves and gratitude within ourselves and connection within ourselves. And that then spreads out into the world that surrounds you. And so those teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh definitely have given me, again, kinds of spiritual tools to step into those sort of perfect Tir na Nog places, to be very, very close to a sense of being really connected to the ancestors. So there's a sort of a spiritual practice, a type of mindful meditative practice that allows you to step into those that kind of sacred space. That sacred space is available everywhere. It's how we dynamically work with it
and recognize it as sacred. Lorian, who was a guest last July on here, Druids can be the calm in the eye of the storm.
Yeah,
I think that's so true. And so Stefan says, if we can plant trees and change our eating habits, we may have a chance. And then Hannah says it's the disconnection with nature, I think, is the problem, as too many are disconnected. And I think that relates to what Poppy said earlier. There's not that we're too many, is that we've lost our true essence. And Gabrielle says, it seems much easier to focus on fixing climate than fixing humanity. That's an interesting one. And she says, my inner fairy just kicked in. Lovely. So what would you say gives you hope? Okay, you say we're very lucky to where we are, but then when you think of other parts of the world where, you think just of Afghanistan and what's happening to women there, for example, or Syria or Yemen or so many other places in the world that are really, really suffering. What gives you hope?
Decent human values eventually live to rule the day. That uh, uh, it's terrible to be a witness to all these injustices and unnecessary wars or terrible catastrophes, on these unfolding stories, that you can sort of, you feel like you're so powerless to have any influence, like how things unfolded in Syria, for example, or how things have unfolded in Palestine for the last 50 years, or we've had our own problems of unfolding violence and intolerance here in Ireland as well, and thankfully we've lived through it and endured and come out the other side, and with a deeper understanding of what it takes to live together and share the planet together. So and that's a constant human story. That's what's going on all over the place for people all the time. It seems to have been a dynamic of humanity right through history. So we're learning, and my hope would be that our learnings will become more sophisticated, and maybe COVID will have taught us something interesting about being one global family.
I hope so.
And that the path to everybody's well-being on the planet is through types of collaboration and cooperation and working together, rather than this nonsense of competition and who controls what.
Exactly. Alinia says, I think we need to remember too that we're in such a small part of the Earth's history. Humans have their numbers rise and fall like any other species. Earth will continue on and we may go.
Sure.
Now, Salve says something, and she's from Tyrone, but aren't there the looming threat of minerals, prospective mining and exploitation of such unique landscape throughout the Northwest that has not been given enough exposure? What's happening in Donegal?
Well, there was uranium prospecting here back in the 80s, and whatever, there was a big campaign to try and stop it. There's always some degree of prospecting going on, and ultimately it's down to the way the government licenses these things and who we vote for. So and it's very important to remain vigilant. We have a situation here locally where there's illegal quarrying going on. That's a kind of mining, and there are various people and groups involved in trying to tackle this, and so it's really important that people are active and conscious. And from my point of view, I think it's really important to get the truth out, to get the story out and highlighted. And you can swing public opinion by getting the story right and communicate it in a good way. So that would be one of the things I'd be interested in being involved in.
Yeah, thank you. And it's about speaking out. Aqua says, my hope comes from restoring connectivity with each other in nature. I'm trying to start a non-profit to help heal the world. It's not a one-lady job, though. Not sure how it's going to do it all. Yeah, I think it's like doing what we can in our own sphere, and hopefully that radiates out. That's all we can do is... I know Joanna Macy says, you take one issue, take two issues. You can't take everything, and just see what impact you can, and allow that grow from there. So, so I think about this a lot. How communities of Druids might be able to do a whole lot of leading. We have lots of activists within the order. Some do it through ritual, others do it through protest. Someone says, get Dave the Bard up there. I remember him seeing playing music at, it was, is it not Balcombe? I'm not too sure. Over in the southeast of England, there was a demonstration. The police came, and he just sang and played his guitar. Very, very hard to get annoyed that, when somebody's playing music.
Yeah.
But obviously, they're making a protest, but it's in a very gentle, respectful way.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So Lorien, who she organised, a lot of us did this Back to the Source ritual on World Rivers Day on the 26th of September. And that was an initiative that Lorien had asked us to do.
Right.
And that really, what I loved was that, okay, knowing that there are other people around the world doing the same, having a ritual on the same day for the rivers and for the healing of rivers. So James is glad you're keeping a close eye on that uranium thing. You might look at the Hopi Navajo journey with uranium. It's old news, but a very good warning as to the possible dangers.
Yeah. Hopefully we're moving beyond our need to mine uranium and all these things that we've learnt are very detrimental to us and to the environment, and that we're moving into an age where the elements become our greatest friends, and wind and water are going to be the way forward, for generating power, and the sun itself. The technologies are moving at such a pace now that we will be able to harness the energy of these natural forces much more readily without any pollution or any need to dig into the ground.
I suppose, yes, and it's when there's a will, and if there's political will and commercial will, etc.
Sure.
And it's like, if it's in the interest of capitalism, it'll happen. And sometimes good things happen as a result because, there's money to be making this, so we can turn around and stop. Or obviously, even to make solar panels, you need to take something out of the earth in order to do it. But if you rely mostly on solar, then perhaps you're using less of the Earth's resources and relying more on. I got solar panels on my camper van in the summer, and even with Ireland and the rain and the clouds, I'm getting good power. I'm really impressed that even in this dull country that I can actually maintain a battery to charge my bike and to have a fridge from it. That's really exciting to be able to do that.
And the technology is becoming more affordable and more available all the time. So we're moving in the right direction. That's for sure. And the Irish landscape had no windmills 30 years ago. Now we have great big wind farms, and a considerable part of the energy needs of the country are being generated by wind power. And there's now talk of they're laying lines between Ireland and the continent and France, where they're going to link in our energy network with the continental energy network so that we can share energy. And that's one of the major strategies to take it to a next level, so that in times to come, they haven't figured out how they're going to store the energy yet. Batteries are still a problem, really, in terms of the levels. But the energy generation, Ireland could be powering a considerable part of the European needs from its wind, with infrastructural development. That's what they're now talking about. Yeah, there'll be these big wind farms out in the ocean. That's what's going to come, I think, next. So we have the most reliable wind in Europe.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And of course, you live in a very windy area. All right.
Yeah,
that's really, really interesting. So let's get back to Druidry. What is your favorite sacred site in Ireland?
Oh God. Um, I've visited many of them, and probably it would be a toss-up between Uisneach and Tara, because of their central significance, and um, they're they're like the two. One is Tara may have been more of a political capital, and Uisneach may have been more of a kind of ritual or spiritual capital. Um, and if I had to choose between the two, it would probably be Uisneach because of its central significance. It's known as the navel of Ireland. It just is the very center, and that's just from a kind of an instinctive point of view. I've been there a number of times, but I just haven't yet spent enough time there. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, I agree.
That I haven't just spent enough time there yet to completely feel like I'm fully connected. Recently, I was at Tara, and I had a really wonderful experience of a deeper sense of connection to the place. And there's a beautiful story about how the portioning of Ireland was remembered by this ancient druid, Fintan, who was recounting this to the High King of Ireland. And he talked about the qualities of north, south, east, and west, and the center. I that's one of the motifs that I use, that I work with a lot, on an ongoing basis. I constantly revisit that, and its meaning and how I understand it in my daily life and in my daily practices. And Uisneach is the center point, the heart point of the country, and it has just that I want to spend more time. If I had the opportunity, I would stay there for a while, I think, if I could, and sleep on the land itself and all those things. And I'd like to meet more of the people who are associated with and know the stories of it. And recently, there's these beautiful wells on the hill itself, and
Tubber on Lake, the hero's well.
Yeah. All that. I haven't had enough of that yet. Just for my own sense of a deeper connection to the place. So yeah, I'd like to go and live there for a while, really, if I could. Yeah.
It's funny. There are so many places in Ireland that I have yet to visit and to spend, like you say, longer time. And it's like you need 20 lifetimes to even just to explore Ireland, never mind. And that's and we've a tiny country, not to mention the rest of the world. And it's lovely to be living in a place that's so rich with heritage and history and magic. Absolutely. So what is it saying? Salve says, no better a sacred site to harvest the sound than on Tara. What she says, we should set up a Druid Airbnb. Lovely. Anyway, listen, we're coming to the end of our time. And so what is your favorite season and what is your favorite ceremony, on the Wheel of the Year? That's usually my last question to ask people.
God. There was two parts to that question. What was the first part again?
Your favorite season and then your favorite festival.
I'd probably have to say spring. I absolutely love the autumn too. I find myself every year going, oh my God, I love this time of year. I love this time of year because of the way the light changes and the harvest and the magic of Halloween and all these things. It's an absolutely glorious time of the year. I suppose that comes from my childhood because it was it was a magical time of the year, that the whole build up into the autumn and into the winter was always full of promise and magic. And just as you asked me, I would find it very difficult to have a really favorite anything in some ways, but what popped into my mind was Imbolc. In the early spring, the Festival of Bridget has kind of grown in its significance for me as a deeper way to be respectful and reverent to the female energy of that time of year. And we have all these great traditions associated with Saint Bridget that really, as far as I'm concerned, kind of are completely interconnected with an older sense of the goddess Bridget. So I don't really have a hard differentiation between the saint and the goddess. I think they're all the one thing, really. There are. We've had really lovely Imbolc ceremonies here in my place, and I found myself in the company of women in the most beautiful way, in honoring the kind of all the stages of the goddess, the maid mother, the old hag, all those things in a really beautiful way, and also kind of actually just standing back and letting it happen too. That being a kind of a passive participant in ceremony is also very nice. But I'm supporting it by providing the venue and all those kind of things, and being the host. So they've been very, especially at that time of year, been particularly enriching. I love all of the ceremony. I love all of the quarter points, the 8 points in the year. I very, very happily mark them all. Sometimes by myself, many times with friends and fellow druids. So I would go and visit other druids sometimes, like yourself. Go down to your ceremonies or meet up in other places with folk as well. So yeah. Spring.
Well, there was a bit of a competition here between, I think, Alinea and Gabriella. One said, no, you were definitely going to say Bieltana. You were definitely going to say that. And I said, no, it would be Seán, but I knew you didn't. So
yeah,
it was because he's an altar to Lou, and Bridget should have been my clue.
Nice. Yeah.
I find I love Samhain, but I actually, and I know often when I'm preparing for the ceremony and I'm in the circle, I go, oh, this is my favorite one. And then the next time it's my favorite one. What's really lovely about the Wheel of the Year, unlike anything, when I was in school, I had subjects I loved and subjects I didn't. And then when I was studying psychology, there were certain aspects of psychology I did not like, and others I loved. And it's really lovely to have a Wheel of the Year that I don't say, oh God, I can't stand this one. I actually enjoy them all and recognize the importance and the significance and the importance of being connected, and my link with the ceremony, with from within to without.
Sure.
That it's a lovely framework from which to live your life.
Yeah.
And that there isn't one bad one. I used to find the transition once the end of August came and beginning September, because I'm thinking, oh, we're going to head now to the dark time of the year. But once I would come to the equinox, celebrating that the harvest and all the gratitude. And once I pass that, then I surrender to the dark. And now I'm in it, coming into Samhain. And I'm really, really enjoying it. But I'm looking forward to Samhain. And then I look forward to the winter solstice, and so on and so forth. So it's a lovely framework, because you go around, and each time it could be the same ceremony, but each year it's different, and there's a different magic because of the people who come. So it's lovely.
I also I'm kind of looking forward. Well, I'm looking forward to just having my own private, just me ceremony for Samhain this year, and I'll do a really nice job of it. So that's also important sometimes, to have that capacity and have that ability and freedom to be able to have your own person. It's like time to pray by yourself, or time to have a deepening connection, that you need your own time to do this work too. So just it just the way things have worked out, that's what I'll be doing this weekend. It probably, if things had been a bit different last week, I probably would have been with a whole load of people celebrating Samhain. So it's just the way things work out. And I'm happy to have that. I'm really looking forward to having that sense of solitude too, to be able to really sit with my fire and with my ancestors. Just that.
Well, Seán, thank you so much for being an absolutely wonderful guest.
You're very welcome.
I know that lots of lovely comments, and so I'm just going to say goodnight to you, but you stay where you are, because I'm going to come back, because we're going to look at the comments afterwards. So,
right.
So you can say goodnight to everybody now.
Good night. Nice to be here.
Lovely. So thank you all for your wonderful comments and for joining in this conversation. It's lovely. It just makes these conversations so more enjoyable when you feed the questions and you join in as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing you next week for another Fireside Chat. Iahana is this Sunday. So if you're celebrating this weekend or the following weekend, Samhain lasts the whole month in Ireland, which I love. So Banachti, Nahauna, Jeev Galer, the blessings of Samhain to you all. Until I see you again next week, good night, good morning, good afternoon. So listen, have a great weekend. Until then, slán go fóill.